The rain hadn't stopped since the funeral. The sky stayed gray, and every drop that hit the window felt like a whisper reminding Emily of what she'd lost. The house was too quiet, filled with traces of Daniel everywhere. His jacket still hanging by the door, his mug still by the sink. 3 days had passed since she buried her husband, but it still didn't feel real. She kept expecting to hear his voice calling from the next room, or the sound of his footsteps coming down the stairs. Instead, there was only silence and the soft hum of grief that never went away. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. Emily almost ignored it, thinking it was another neighbor bringing food or flowers she couldn't eat or smell anymore. But when she opened the door, her breath caught. Daniel's parents stood there. Margaret and Robert. She hadn't seen them since the funeral, where Margaret barely looked at her. Now they were on her doorstep, their faces cold and unreadable. "Emily," Margaret said stiffly, her tone more like a command than a greeting. "We need to talk." Emily stepped aside out of habit, though her instincts told her not to. The older couple walked in as if they owned the place. They didn't remove their coats or even glance around with sadness. Margaret's eyes scanned the living room walls, stopping at the framed wedding photos of Emily and Daniel. She frowned. "This house," Margaret began, her voice sharp. "Daniel told us he paid for most of it. You know that, don't you?" Emily blinked, unsure where this was going. "We bought it together," she said. "We both paid for it. It's our home." Robert, quiet until now, stepped forward. "Daniel took out a loan for this place," he said. "You didn't work full-time then? You were recovering, weren't you?" His tone made the word sound like an accusation. Emily's chest tightened. She remembered those early years when Daniel had supported her after her mother's death. She had gone back to work later, helped pay bills, contributed to everything they owned. They had done everything as a team. That was what marriage meant to her. But Margaret's next words shattered that thought. "This house belongs to our son, and now that he's gone, it belongs to us. We've already spoken to a lawyer." Emily felt her stomach drop. "What are you talking about?" "That's not how it works." Margaret's expression hardened. "You'll find somewhere else to live. It's only fair. You had a few good years with him." "We lost our son." Emily's throat went dry. "You're saying I should just leave my own home?" Robert's eyes narrowed. "You're not family anymore, Emily. Not without Daniel." The words cut deep, deeper than any argument or insult she'd ever faced. Family. She had loved Daniel's parents like her own. She had cooked for them, celebrated birthdays with them, even taken care of Margaret when she fell ill last winter. And now, days after losing Daniel, they were pushing her out as if she were nothing. She tried to reason with them. "Daniel wouldn't want this. He wanted us to..." Margaret interrupted, her tone sharp and final. "Daniel isn't here anymore, and we're not asking. We're telling you. Pack your things." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. Emily stared at them, unable to speak. She could see the determination in their eyes. They truly believed they were entitled to everything. Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, placing it on the table. "This came from our lawyer," she said. "It explains everything." Then they left, their footsteps echoing down the hallway like a countdown. When the door closed behind them, Emily stood frozen. She stared at the envelope, her hands trembling. The house that had been her comfort suddenly felt cold and unfamiliar. Finally, she tore it open. Inside was a letter, formal and heartless, stating that Margaret and Robert were claiming ownership of the property. They claimed Daniel's name was the only one on the original loan, that Emily had no legal right to stay. She sank onto the couch, staring at the paper until the words blurred. How could they do this? How could they take the one place where she still felt close to him? Tears came, but they weren't gentle. They were hot and angry. Her grief turned into something else, something darker. It wasn't just about losing Daniel anymore. It was about losing everything he had built with her. As night fell, the rain grew louder. Emily sat by the window, watching the lightning flicker across the sky. The world outside was chaotic, matching the storm inside her. She replayed every moment she had spent with Daniel's parents. How Margaret had always found ways to belittle her. How Robert rarely defended her. She had thought they would soften after his death. Instead, they struck when she was weakest. Her mind wandered to the last conversation she'd had with Daniel. He had been sick but still smiling. "Promise me you'll stay strong," he had said. "Don't let anyone take what's yours." At the time, she thought he meant her dreams. Now she realized he had meant more than that. She stood up and went to Daniel's study. The smell of his book still lingered. His desk was neat, his handwriting scattered across a few unfinished notes. She sat in his chair, feeling the weight of his absence and the warmth of his memory. She opened the bottom drawer, the one where he kept important documents. Inside, she found the house deed, tucked neatly in a folder. Her breath caught as she read the names. The deed listed both of them, Daniel and Emily Richards, equal owners. His parents were wrong. Completely wrong. A surge of relief mixed with fury. They had lied. Or maybe they didn't know. Either way, they had tried to take advantage of her grief, thinking she wouldn't fight back. Emily's reflection in the window looked different now. The tear-streaked woman from earlier was gone. In her place was someone colder, steadier. She wasn't going to let them win. Not by screaming or begging, but by proving them wrong step by step. She spent the next few hours gathering every document she could find. Bank statements, loan records, receipts. Every line of proof that showed she was just as much an owner as Daniel had been. Her fingers trembled not with fear but determination. If they wanted a fight, she would give them one. Still, beneath her resolve, there was pain. Revenge wasn't something she ever imagined herself capable of. But this wasn't petty vengeance, it was survival. It was justice for what Daniel had built, for what they had tried to take. The following morning, Emily woke up before sunrise. The air was heavy, but her thoughts were clear. She looked around the house, every wall holding memories, the laughter, the arguments, the life they had created. Margaret and Robert wanted to erase all of that, to turn this home into something cold and empty. She wouldn't let them. When the doorbell rang again that morning, she didn't hesitate. She opened it to find Margaret standing there, holding a box as if she had already decided to move in. "I thought I made myself clear," Margaret said, her tone icy. Emily stepped aside, not saying a word. Margaret walked in, looking around with a smug smile. "You should start packing. I'll give you a week." Emily walked to the table and placed the house deed in front of her. "You might want to read this before making plans," she said quietly. Margaret frowned, picking it up. As she read, her expression shifted from confidence to confusion, then anger. "What is this supposed to mean?" "It means," Emily said, her voice calm but sharp, "you're standing in my house." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Margaret set the papers down with trembling hands and stormed out. When the door slammed behind her, Emily finally exhaled. The house felt hers again, even if only for now. She knew they wouldn't give up easily, but neither would she. That night, as the rain finally stopped, she looked out at the clearing sky. The storm had passed, but a new one was coming. And this time she was ready. Emily wasn't just grieving anymore. She was preparing. The days that followed were long, restless, and filled with a silence that seemed to echo. Emily barely slept. Every morning, she woke up before sunrise and sat in the living room, clutching the house deed like it was a shield. She knew she had the proof, but proof wasn't enough. Margaret and Robert were powerful, stubborn people. They had money, connections, and pride. They wouldn't walk away easily. A week passed before she heard from them again. Margaret's voice came through the phone, sharp and unkind. "You can drag this out if you want," she said. "But sooner or later that house will be ours. Don't embarrass yourself." Emily said nothing. She hung up and stared at the wall. For years, she had tried to be kind, understanding, patient. She had believed that family was something you protected, even when it hurt. But those days were gone. Daniel's death had changed everything, and his parents' greed had destroyed whatever remained of that fragile bond. Instead of crying, Emily began to plan. She went through every folder Daniel had left behind, every bank statement and email. She wanted to know exactly what they were trying to take from her. What she discovered made her heart stop. Daniel hadn't just listed her as a co-owner of the house. He had changed his will before his death. Everything, his savings, investments, and life insurance, was left to her. There was no mention of his parents. Not a word, Daniel had known. Somewhere deep down, he must have known what they were capable of, and he had tried to protect her. Tears filled her eyes. But they weren't tears of grief anymore. They were tears of clarity. Her husband had trusted her to stand strong, to fight if she had to. Now, it was her turn to honor that. That night, Emily met with a lawyer, a calm woman named Claire, who listened carefully as Emily explained everything. When Emily handed her the documents, Claire smiled faintly. "You have nothing to worry about. The property is yours, but," she paused, "you said they've been threatening you?" Emily nodded. "They won't stop. They want me out, even if they have no right." "Then we'll handle it legally," Claire said. "But be prepared. They won't take defeat easily." The next few days became a blur of preparation. Letters were sent. Calls were made. Emily stayed quiet, waiting. But every time the phone rang or someone knocked, her heart raced. She hated living in fear inside her own home. She hated that they made her feel small. Then, something changed. Margaret called again, but this time her voice was softer, almost polite. "We want to talk," she said. "Face to face. No lawyers." Emily hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse, but another part wanted to see them, to look them in the eyes and make them understand what they'd done. She agreed to meet them that weekend. When Saturday came, the house felt heavier than ever. Emily cleaned the living room, not because she cared what they thought, but because it gave her something to do. The sound of the vacuum drowned out her nerves. She told herself this was the moment. She wasn't the grieving widow anymore. She was the rightful owner of her home. At exactly 4 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Margaret and Robert stood there, dressed neatly, pretending civility. They walked in without waiting for an invitation. Emily noticed how their eyes scanned the room again, as if measuring what they would soon take. Margaret smiled tightly. "We didn't come to fight," she said. "We just want to talk." "Then talk," Emily replied, folding her arms. Robert cleared his throat. "We know things have been tense," he said. "Daniel was our only child. Losing him has changed us." Emily said nothing, waiting for the real reason they came. Margaret sighed. "You have your documents. Fine. But you know this house was mostly bought with his money. Wouldn't it be fair if you shared it? Maybe sell it and split the value?" Emily's chest tightened, but she stayed calm. "Fair," she said quietly. "Where was fairness when you told me to leave 3 days after the funeral?" Margaret's face twitched. "We were grieving." "No," Emily said firmly. "You were greedy." The older woman's expression darkened. "Watch your tone, Emily. We're not your enemies." "Yes," Emily said, her voice steady. "You are." For a long moment, no one spoke. The ticking of the clock filled the air. Then Margaret's tone turned sharp again. "You think you've won? You don't know what you're dealing with." Emily smiled faintly. "Actually, I do." She walked to the coffee table and picked up a folder she had prepared earlier. She opened it and pulled out several documents, the house deed, the updated will, and a bank statement proving joint ownership. She laid them in front of them, one by one. "This," she said, pointing to the deed, "says I own the house. This," she continued, holding up the will, "says Daniel left everything to me. And this," she finished, showing the statement, "proves that the loan payments came from both of us." Margaret stared at the papers, her confidence draining. "This can't be right," she whispered. "It is," Emily said. "And there's a copy with my lawyer, just in case." Robert tried to speak, but Emily cut him off. "You came here thinking you could scare me, but Daniel made sure that wouldn't happen. He trusted me to protect what we built. You tried to destroy that." Margaret's face turned red. "You think this is over?" "It's been over since you walked in that first day," Emily said. "Now leave my house." The older woman looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Emily's voice stopped her. For the first time, she realized the woman standing before her wasn't broken. She was strong, calm, firm, unshaken. Without another word, Margaret turned and stormed out. Robert followed quietly. The door slammed shut behind them. For several minutes, Emily just stood there, the tension slowly draining from her body. Her hands shook, but she felt lighter than she had in weeks. The house was silent again, but it didn't feel cold anymore. It felt hers. That night, she sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the moonlight spill across the floor. The world outside was peaceful, but inside, her thoughts were still storming. She had stood up for herself. She had protected her home, but deep down, something didn't feel right. Part of her wanted to celebrate, but another part couldn't forget the look in Margaret's eyes before she left. Anger mixed with humiliation. Emily knew this wasn't the end. People like Margaret didn't forgive or forget, and revenge, even when justified, came with a cost. Over the next few days, Emily began to notice strange things. A letter left in her mailbox with no return address, a car parked across the street that stayed for hours. She wasn't sure if she was being watched or if her mind was just restless. One evening, she caught herself staring at Daniel's photo on the wall. "You'd hate what this has become," she whispered. "You'd tell me to stop," but she couldn't, not yet. She wasn't going to let them take another step into her life. So, she decided to end it completely. She called Claire, her lawyer, and arranged for one final meeting, this time with a legal officer present. The next afternoon, Margaret and Robert arrived again, expecting another argument. But what awaited them wasn't a conversation, it was closure. Claire handed them a signed document confirming Emily's full ownership, witnessed and sealed by the court. There was nothing left to argue. No loophole. No trick. Margaret's hands shook as she read it. "You planned this," she hissed. Emily met her gaze calmly. "I protected myself. That's all." For the first time, Margaret had no reply. Robert put a hand on her shoulder, quietly guiding her toward the door. When they left, Emily watched them drive away, their car disappearing into the distance. A long breath escaped her lips. It was over. But as the evening light faded, she realized something unexpected. The victory didn't feel sweet. It felt quiet, almost hollow. She had won the fight, but the peace she wanted still felt out of reach. The house was safe, but her heart wasn't. Emily sat down, looking around at the walls filled with memories. She finally understood something Daniel had once told her. Revenge gives you control for a moment, but forgiveness gives you freedom forever. That night, she slept for the first time in weeks. The war was over, but the real healing, the kind that came without anger, was only beginning. The morning after the final confrontation felt different. The air in the house was still, quiet, and strangely heavy. Emily woke up before dawn, her body exhausted but her mind alert. The sun was only a faint glow on the horizon, painting the sky in pale gold. She sat at the edge of her bed, listening to the sound of the wind brushing against the windows. For the first time in weeks, there were no phone calls, no threats, no knocks at the door. Margaret and Robert were gone. The battle was over. She walked through the house barefoot, touching the walls as if confirming that they were real. Every corner of the home whispered memories of Daniel. His laughter when they painted the living room, his quiet hum while cooking breakfast, the way he always left his shoes in the wrong place. For a moment, Emily almost smiled. But the silence that followed wasn't comforting. It was haunting. Winning should have felt like relief, but it didn't. It felt empty. The papers were signed, the ownership confirmed, and yet there was no peace in her heart. The victory she had chased so hard tasted bitter now. She made herself tea and sat by the window, staring at the garden Daniel had planted. The flowers had wilted slightly, but they still stood, fragile yet alive. She thought about how much Daniel loved taking care of them. "Everything grows when you give it patience," he used to say. She had loved that about him, his calm, his kindness, his ability to forgive even when people didn't deserve it. But she wasn't like him. Not anymore. The last few weeks had changed her. She had learned how cold revenge could feel once the anger faded. As the morning light filled the room, she noticed a thin layer of dust on Daniel's old study desk. She walked over and opened it. Inside were his journals, one of which she had never read before. The leather cover was worn, his handwriting neat and familiar. She hesitated, then opened it. The first page made her heart ache. If I'm gone, I hope Emily remembers that peace is a choice. I don't want her to fight my battles. I want her to live. She closed her eyes, tears falling silently. His words felt like he was speaking directly to her from beyond. For weeks, she had fought with all her strength, believing she was honoring him by protecting what he built. But now, she saw it differently. Daniel hadn't cared about the walls, the bricks, or the property. He cared about her peace, her life, her freedom. She closed the journal and sat there for a long time, staring out the window. Maybe she had won the war, but she had lost something greater, her sense of calm, her hope, her ability to forgive. That afternoon, she took a long walk through town. The streets were busy, filled with people living their ordinary lives. For the first time, she realized how much she had withdrawn from the world. Everything she did had revolved around the fight, around proving herself right. She hadn't eaten properly, hadn't laughed, hadn't truly lived. Passing a small bakery, she stopped. The smell of fresh bread drifted out, reminding her of the mornings when she and Daniel would walk there together. She stepped inside and bought 2 loaves, though she didn't know why. Maybe out of habit, maybe out of longing. The old woman behind the counter smiled and said, "You look tired, dear. Hard times?" Emily smiled faintly. "Getting better," she said, though she wasn't sure it was true. She walked home slowly, thinking about everything. Her anger had been like a wall that protected her from pain. But now that the fight was over, that wall was crumbling. All that remained was sadness and a strange clarity. When she reached home, the sun was setting. The sky was glowing orange and pink, casting warm light across the house. She placed the bread on the counter, then stood in the middle of the living room, looking around one last time. This house had been her battlefield, her prison, and her refuge all at once. But now, it felt like a reminder of everything she wanted to leave behind. She realized she didn't want to live surrounded by constant memories of pain. She didn't want to sleep in a place where every corner whispered of what she had lost. That night, she made her decision. The next morning, she called Claire, her lawyer. "I want to sell the house," she said calmly. Claire sounded surprised. "Are you sure? After everything you've been through?" "Yes," Emily said softly. "I fought for this house because I thought it was my last piece of Daniel. But he's not here. Not in these walls. He's in my heart. And that's enough." Claire was quiet for a moment, then said, "If that's what you want, I'll take care of it." Once she hung up, Emily walked through each room slowly. She packed only what mattered: Daniel's journal, a few photos, a small box of keepsakes. Everything else she left behind: the furniture, the curtains, the things they'd collected over the years. It all belonged to another life, one that had already ended. When she stepped outside later that day, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: lightness. The air felt new, the sky wider. For the first time since Daniel's death, she wasn't weighed down by anger or fear. She was free. As she locked the front door for the last time, a car pulled up by the curb. To her surprise, Margaret stepped out. Her face looked tired, older somehow. Robert stayed inside the car, his gaze distant. Emily didn't move. Margaret approached slowly, her voice softer than Emily had ever heard it. "You're leaving?" "Yes," Emily said. "It's time." Margaret looked down, twisting her hands together. For a moment, She seemed to struggle with her words. Then she said quietly, "I was angry. Losing Daniel. It broke something in me. I thought taking the house would bring me closer to him. But I see now it only pushed everyone away." Emily watched her, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to turn away, but another part, the part Daniel had loved, told her to listen. "I don't expect forgiveness," Margaret continued. "But I wanted to say I'm sorry. You didn't deserve what we did." The apology hung in the air like a fragile thread. Emily felt something shift inside her, anger softening into something gentler. She didn't say the words "I forgive you," but she nodded. That was enough. Margaret gave a small smile, eyes glistening. "Daniel would be proud of you," she said, then turned back to the car. Emily stood there until they drove away. The weight that had pressed on her for so long lifted a little more. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily sat on the front steps with Daniel's journal in her lap. She opened it to the last page and read his final entry, written in shaky handwriting. "If you ever lose your way, find it in kindness. That's where we belong." She smiled through her tears. The war was over, and peace, true peace, had finally begun. Over the following weeks, Emily moved to a smaller town by the coast. The sound of the sea filled her days, and for the first time, she learned how to live for herself. She took up painting again, something she had given up years ago. She volunteered at the local community center, helping others who had lost loved ones. Slowly, her heart began to heal. Sometimes, when she watched the sunset, she thought of Daniel, not with pain anymore, but with quiet gratitude. He had given her love, strength, and one final lesson: to choose peace over revenge. One evening, as waves crashed softly against the shore, Emily whispered into the wind, "I'm free now, Daniel." The breeze brushed against her cheek, warm and gentle, like a silent answer. She smiled, closed the journal, and walked toward the glowing horizon, leaving behind not just a house, but a chapter of her life that had finally come to rest. Moral: revenge might feel powerful, but peace is stronger. True victory is not in destroying those who hurt us. It's in freeing ourselves from their hold and learning to live again.